What the Dark Keeps. The night Nora Briggs learned that silence had a price, she was holding a whiskey bottle in her left hand and a bar rag in her right, and the jukebox in the corner was playing a Merle Haggard song that nobody had selected because nobody ever had to. The nail played Merle on its own schedule, the way old buildings develop their own habits, something in the wiring that had been making the same decisions since 1987 and saw no reason to change. Highway 50 outside Ely, Nevada, does not invite people in. It passes through, and the people who stop do so because they need something. Gas, food, a bathroom, or the particular kind of dark corner that a roadhouse provides at 11 on a Friday night when the desert outside is cold and the road ahead is long. The nail had been providing that corner for 31 years. It sat low against the highway shoulder, all cinder block and corrugated metal roof, with a neon beer sign in the window that buzzed in a way that suggested it was suffering. The parking lot out front was gravel that had been gravel for so long it had started to compact into something almost intentional. The lot around back was where Nora parked her truck, where the storage shed leaned slightly east, and where in the small room attached to the kitchen that the owner charitably called staff accommodation. Her daughter Chloe slept with a paperback book open on her chest and the small white noise machine Nora had bought at a pharmacy in Elko running steadily on the nightstand. Chloe was 8 years old, and she had her grandfather's dark eyes and her mother's jaw and a case of asthma that required a maintenance inhaler every morning, a rescue inhaler in her backpack, and the particular vigilance of a child who has learned early that her body requires management. She was one of those children who take on responsibilities they should not have to take on, and do so without complaint, which was something Nora watched with a love so fierce it sometimes felt physically painful, and a guilt she carried quietly for the same reason. Nora had been bartending at the Nail for 4 years. Before that, she had been a receptionist at a dental office in town, which paid less but kept better hours and did not require her to manage the specific kind of male behavior that appears at 11 on a Friday when men have been drinking since 8. The dental office had closed when the dentist retired, and his daughter, who had trained to take over the practice, had instead moved to Portland with a woman named Keeley and sent her father a very sincere apology note. Nora did not blame the dentist's daughter. She blamed the economics of small-town Nevada and her own lack of a degree and the series of decisions she had made at 22 that had seemed reasonable at the time and now constituted the architecture of her life. Her ex-husband's name was Danny Briggs, and he had not been a bad man in the dramatic sense. He had not been violent or cruel. He had been exactly what he appeared to be, a man who was not equal to the life he had agreed to, who had grown steadily more absent over 4 years of marriage, and then one afternoon simply completed the process he had already been undertaking by increments and left. He had sent child support payments for 11 months, and then the payments became irregular, and then they stopped, and Nora had consulted a lawyer whose fees would have cost more than she was owed, and made the calculation that most single mothers eventually make, which is that you stop chasing what isn't coming, and you figure out how to cover the gap yourself. She had been covering the gap for 3 years. She was good at it. She was good at most things she decided to be good at, which was one of the things about Nora that people noticed, and then occasionally resented, because competence in women who should theoretically need more help than they do tends to make certain people uncomfortable. She kept a precise budget on a spiral notepad in the kitchen drawer. She knew the exact cost of Chloe's medication by pharmacy and by month. She knew her rent to the dollar, her utilities to the approximate dollar, and the number of shifts she needed to cover both with enough left over to keep the truck running and Chloe in shoes that fit properly. What she did not have, as of this particular Friday, was a margin. The margin had been $140 in an envelope in the kitchen drawer, and it had gone to Chloe's last urgent care visit 3 weeks ago when the rescue inhaler had not been sufficient, and Nora had driven 40 minutes to a clinic in the dark with her daughter breathing in the careful, shallow way that turned Nora's blood cold every time, and the bill had been $260. and Nora had paid it with the margin and a portion of the following month's rent, which meant February was going to require precision. She was thinking about February precision at 11:14 on a Friday night when the door opened and the four of them came in. She noticed them the way she had learned to notice people who walked into a room like the room was lucky to have them. Not loud, not yet. Just the particular quality of movement that belongs to men who have never been told that spaces belong to everyone in them equally, who enter with the assumption of ownership so long established it has become posture. They were young, late 20s maybe, good clothes worn carelessly the way expensive things look when the person wearing them has never had to think about what they cost. The one in front was tall, with the kind of jaw that had probably made his life significantly easier than it deserved, and the specific confidence of someone who had never been wrong in any room he had occupied. His name, she would learn later, was Preston Vance. She did not know that yet. She knew the type. She had been reading the type from this side of a bar for 4 years, and she could calibrate them within 30 seconds of watching them move. These were not the worst type. They were not the men who got physical early. They were the men who got cruel in the measured, deniable way of people who believe that cruelty delivered with a smile is technically not cruelty. They were the men who left small tips and large impressions of themselves and thought that was a reasonable exchange. There was also the man in the corner booth whom she noticed for entirely different reasons. He had been there for 2 hours by the time Preston's group came in. He had ordered black coffee and a plate of food that he ate about 2/3 of, and then left alone without pushing it away, the way certain people leave food not from dissatisfaction, but from the simple cessation of the requirement. He had not looked at his phone since he sat down. He had not appeared to read anything. He had sat with his coffee and watched the room with the particular quality of attention that she had learned to recognize in men who had been in situations where watching the room was a survival skill rather than a social habit. He did not look threatening. He looked present, which was different. There were people who took up space in a room and people who occupied it, and this man occupied it in the specific way of someone who is fully aware of every entry and exit point, and every person between himself and each of them, and has been aware of these things for so long that the awareness runs without requiring his conscious attention. She poured coffee for Hector and Dave and thought nothing more about the man in the corner booth until the moment everything else changed. Nora set 4 coasters on the bar with the automatic precision of someone who has done a thing 10,000 times and does not need to think about it anymore. "What can I get you?" Preston looked at her in the way that was already a comment before he said anything. Slow, deliberate, the kind of look that lands on a woman and just sits there like he was waiting for her to acknowledge that she had received it. "Whatever you recommend," he said, and then smiled at his friends. She recommended a local draft. She recommended it efficiently and without inflection. She poured 4 glasses and took his card to open the tab and went back to the other end of the bar where 2 regulars, Hector and Dave, were watching a game on the television mounted above the liquor shelf and not bothering anyone. For the first 40 minutes, Preston and his friends were the kind of loud that is technically within the range of acceptable. They took up their corner of the bar and drank steadily and talked at volumes designed to be overheard without being addressed. Preston's voice had the particular carrying quality of someone who has spent his life in rooms with good acoustics and never been asked to lower it. She caught pieces: resort development, quarter projections. His father's name said the way children say the names of people they have leverage through easily, frequently, as a verb as much as a noun. My father, this. What my father said. The way my father handles. She refilled their glasses and said nothing. The first real thing happened at 11:52. Preston had been watching her move. She was aware of it in the way that women in service work become aware of being watched, not through any single obvious signal, but through the accumulated weight of a gaze that does not move away when it should. He had been watching for 40 minutes by then, and she had been managing it with the practiced neutrality of someone who has developed this particular skill over years of necessity. "Hey," he said. She turned. "Come here." She walked over. "What do you need?" He put a $50 bill on the bar and slid it toward her. "Not for a drink," he said. "For your number." She looked at the 50. She looked at him. "I don't give out my number," she said. "You need anything else right now?" She turned to go. His hand closed on her wrist. Not hard, not immediately hard, just the first statement of a position. "I wasn't done," he said. She looked down at his hand. She looked up at him. Her voice, when she found it, was very flat and very clear. "Let go." He held for a half-second longer than he needed to, then released. He did it with the smile still in place, which meant the point had been made to his satisfaction, regardless of the outcome. She went back to the other end of the bar. Hector, who had been watching without appearing to watch, caught her eye. She shook her head slightly. Hector nodded and returned to the game. The next 40 minutes built in the way these things build degree by degree, each increment small enough to seem individually manageable, the cumulative effect something else entirely. The comments got closer. The requests for refills became opportunities. One of the friends started filming on his phone that particular casual-seeming angle that was not casual at all. Preston called her by a name he had given her, not her actual name, just a nickname that sat slightly below what she could formally object to and slightly above what she could comfortably ignore. She did not let it show. She had learned not to let it show because letting it show was information, and information in these situations was currency, and she was not going to give it to him. What she was thinking about, with the precise and unwilled clarity that crisis sometimes produces, was February. She was thinking about $260 and the specific weight of a month where the margin was gone. She was thinking about Chloe's inhaler and what it cost without the insurance she carried through the Nails employment, and whether the insurance went away, if the employment went away, and whether the employment could go away, and whether this man had the kind of influence that could make that happen. She was thinking these things and still doing her job, pouring, wiping, reading the room, managing the temperature the way a bartender manages temperature. At 12:31, Preston put $300 on the bar. "Not for a drink." He said it the same way as before. "Just for your number, Nora." "Come on. I tip well. I tip very well." He looked at his friends and back at her. "My dad gives me $5,000 a week spending money, and I've barely touched half of it." He spread his hands. 300. Just the number. The bar had gone quiet in the specific way bars go quiet when something is happening that everyone has decided to observe and not involve themselves in. Nora could feel it, the slight angling away, the concentration on glasses, the particular studied absorption in things that were not happening. She looked at the $300. It was almost exactly Chloe's medication for 2 months. She looked at Preston's face and understood something about him in that moment with total clarity. He knew that. He had looked at her and calculated the worn edges of her situation, and he had arrived at a number that was designed not to purchase her number, but to demonstrate that everything had a price and that he knew hers, and was willing to wait for her to arrive at the same understanding. "Keep it," she said. "Is there anything else I can get you tonight?" His face changed. Just slightly, just enough. Something harder came through the surface. "Excuse me." "Keep your money," she said. "I don't want it." She turned. What happened next happened fast. In the specific way things happen fast when they have been building for an hour and a half, and one moment tips the accumulated weight over the edge. His hand caught her shoulder. Not a wrist this time. A shoulder, and harder a pull backward that caught her off balance and sent her into the bar edge with her hip, and she grabbed the rail and turned, and he was already there, close, too close, and his face had shed the smile now, and what was underneath it was the precise and ugly truth of a person who has never been refused anything and does not know how to absorb it. "Who do you think you are?" he said. He said it quietly, which was somehow worse than loud. His friends had their phones up. "Do you know who my father is?" "Let go of me," Nora said. Her voice was steady. She made it steady. "Right now. Let go." His grip tightened. And then he had her apron in his hands. The fabric was old, cheap. The kind of apron you buy at a restaurant supply store in bulk and replace when they wear through, and the tie at the back had been re-knotted twice already. When he yanked it, the knot held for less than a second before the fabric gave. The sound it made was small and final, like something that had been meant to hold, deciding it was done. She went sideways into the bar stool. Her hand caught the rail. She was upright technically, but her uniform shirt had twisted, and her apron was in Preston Vance's hands, and there were 3 phones recording, and the bar was utterly silent, and every single person in it was looking somewhere else. Not one person moved. Nora stood very straight. She did not cover herself. She did not look down. She looked at Preston Vance with the specific steadiness of a woman who has been afraid before and has learned that fear disappears in the exact moment you decide it cannot afford to stay. She was aware in the periphery of her attention that something in the far corner of the room had changed. There was a man sitting alone in the corner booth. He had been there for most of the night, the kind of presence that registers without demanding registration. A coffee cup, a plate, mostly untouched, a leather vest with a small iron bird stitched above the breast pocket. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, and he had the particular weathering of a man who has spent significant portions of his life outdoors and in conditions that were not comfortable. Gray threaded through dark hair, hands on the table that had done the kind of work that leaves permanent evidence. He was not looking at his phone. He had not been looking at his phone all evening. He was looking at Preston Vance. In the corner booth, Ryder Steele set down his coffee cup. The sound it made was almost nothing. The particular almost nothing of a sound that arrives in a silence already so complete that even the smallest addition to it changes the air in the room. He stood up. He did not move fast. He crossed the bar with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has already determined the distance between himself and the thing he is moving toward, and knows exactly how long it will take to cover. 3 of the men who had been watching turned their attention fully toward him as he moved. The 2 older bikers at the far end of the bar who had arrived with him and sat with their drafts and their own counsel all evening did not move. They watched. They knew better than to move when Ryder walked like that. They had seen that walk before years ago in very different circumstances, and they remembered what came next. Preston heard him before he saw him. Something in the way the bar shifted, the way even the jukebox seemed to hold itself. He looked up. Ryder stopped 3 feet from him. He did not say anything immediately. He stood there and looked at Preston Vance with the total unrhetorical attention of a man who has assessed situations under pressure for 30 years and requires no additional time to complete the assessment. Preston stared back. His face had not yet decided what expression to wear. The arrogance was still there, reflexive, habitual, but something underneath it was receiving a signal it did not have a name for yet. "You need to step back," Ryder said. His voice was low and even, not threatening in the conventional sense, just true the way certain statements are true in a way that does not require performance. "Who are you?" Preston said. "Right now," Ryder said, "I'm the only person in this room who is going to give you a chance to do the right thing before this goes somewhere you don't want it to go." He paused. "Look at her." Preston's jaw tightened. "Look at what you just did." "I was just," Preston started. Ryder waited. His expression did not change. There was no anger in his face, which was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. Anger could be argued with outpaced, waited out. This was something else. This was the patience of a man who has run out of the kind of patience that runs out and is now operating on something deeper and colder and considerably more durable. "You're going to give her that apron back," Ryder said. "You're going to apologize to her out loud in front of every person in this room who watched you do this and didn't do a thing about it. And then you're going to settle your tab and leave." The biggest of Preston's friends stood up. He was wide through the shoulders with the specific confidence of someone who has been the biggest person in rooms his entire life and has learned to rely on that as a primary argument. He put a hand on Ryder's shoulder. That hand lasted approximately 1 second on Ryder's shoulder. What happened in the following 2 seconds was not dramatic and was not slow. It was simply precise. A rotation, a controlled application of leverage, and Preston's large friend was bent face forward over the bar edge, making a sound that was not language, and Ryder was standing in exactly the same place he had been standing. The same posture, the same expression, as though the intervention had cost him nothing at all, because it had cost him nothing at all.
Anybody else, Ryder said. The second friend sat back down. The third had his hands already up.
Preston looked at Ryder with the expression of a man performing a rapid and unwilling recalculation. He was drunk, but he was not stupid, and whatever signal Ryder Steele projected in a room, some part of Preston Vance received it clearly, regardless of how much he had consumed. He looked at Nora. He looked at the apron in his hands. He set it on the bar. He walked around the bar edge to where Nora stood. He stopped in front of her. His hands were at his sides. His face was red, and something complicated was moving through it, the collision of what he was and what he was being required to do, and the gap between the two was not comfortable. "I'm sorry," he said. He said it the way people say things when they have been told to say them, and find midway through the saying that they mean them slightly more than they expected to. "I shouldn't have." He stopped. "I'm sorry," he said again. Nora looked at him. She did not say anything. She did not need to say anything. He put his card on the bar to settle the tab. He left $400 in cash beside it, which was more than he had been offering for her number, and which Nora understood was not generosity, but the payment of a debt that had been established without his conscious consent the moment he looked at another person and saw only what they could be made to do. He went to the door. His friends followed. Not one of them said anything. The door closed behind them. Ryder looked at the room. Every face in it, every person who had sat and watched and found something interesting to study in their glass. He did not say anything to them. He turned back to Nora. She was already standing straight. She had not stopped standing straight. She had her hand on the bar rail, and she was breathing with the deliberate slowness of someone managing a physical response, keeping it contained, and her eyes were very bright with a kind of heat that was not tears, but something older and more durable than tears. The heat of a person who has swallowed more than they should have to swallow for a very long time and has just been required to swallow one more thing and has done it because the alternative was not affordable.
"You need anything?" Ryder said.
She looked at him. "I've got it," she said. "You sure?" She looked at the rail under her hand. She looked at the cash on the bar. "Yeah," she said. "I'm sure." Ryder nodded. He went back to his corner booth. He settled his bill. He put on his jacket. He was at the door when her voice stopped him. "Hey," he turned. "What's your name?" He looked at her for a moment. The way he considered the question like he was deciding something and then deciding to answer honestly. "Ryder," he said. She nodded once. "Thank you, Ryder." He went out into the Nevada night and thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. The video was on 3 platforms before 1:30 in the morning. Not the footage Preston's friends had taken that disappeared fast the way things disappear when someone calls someone who knows how to make calls. But the Nail had 2 security cameras, and the footage of what Preston Vance did to Nora Briggs at a Roadhouse bar on a Friday night in Ely, Nevada, followed immediately by what Ryder Steele then did about it, had been uploaded to the internet by a man named Carl, who had been sitting at table 6 with his wife and had made the decision on the drive home that some things deserved to be in the world. It moved fast. 80,000 views by 3 in the morning. 400,000 by sunrise. By 9 in the morning, Nora Briggs had turned down 2 media interview requests and accepted none, and was sitting at her kitchen table in the narrow back room with Chloe eating cereal at the counter and the phone on the table lighting up in a way it had never lit up before, and was trying to figure out what any of this meant for her. She knew viral. She knew what it did. She had watched it happen to other people, and she understood that the attention does not choose sides neatly. It descends on everyone, and it does not discriminate between the person who did the thing and the person the thing was done to, and it does not leave quietly when it goes. Her phone rang at 8:55. The number was her boss, Rod Pittman, who owned the nail and 3 storage units outside of town and a piece of a car wash in Battle Mountain, and who had a particular way of beginning conversations that told you everything before the sentence finished. "Nora," he said, "you need to come in this morning." She knew before she got there. He let her go with the word liability, which is the word employers use when they mean I am afraid of the person who is angry at you, and I am making the calculation that you are more replaceable than the problem you represent. He could not look at her directly. She gave him that he had the decency to be ashamed of himself, which was not nothing, though it also did not change anything. She sat in her truck in the Nails parking lot for 5 minutes with her hands on the steering wheel. She was calculating. She could not afford not to calculate. She had 3 weeks of rent covered and $600 in the account, and Chloe's prescription due in 11 days, and a truck that needed an oil change it had been needing for 2 months. She started the truck and drove. She did not know yet about the inspection notice her landlord had sent that morning. She did not know yet about the dark SUV that had been parked 1 block from Chloe's school since 7 in the morning. She did not know yet that Preston Vance's father had made 22 phone calls before breakfast. What she did know was that something had started the night before that was not finished, and that the particular weight she had been carrying since she was 23, and her father had come home from a job he refused to describe, and started locking sections of his house, had shifted overnight into something with edges. Ryder was 60 miles east on Highway 50 when Deke called. Deke was his vice president, 52 years old, built like a man who had been strong for so long it had become structural rather than intentional, with a voice like gravel, finding its level, and the specific quality of focus that belongs to people who do not speak until they have something to say. "You've seen it," Deke said when Ryder answered. "I've seen it. It's moving fast." "I know." Deke paused. Wind on the line. The sound of the highway. The name of the man is Preston Vance. His father is Harlan Vance. He runs Vance Land Group out of Las Vegas. Commercial real estate resort development highway corridor acquisition. 2 state legislators who vote the way Harlan Vance needs them to vote whenever the relevant committees meet. "How do you know all that already?" "Because I started looking the second that kid said his father's name on camera." Deke's voice was careful. "Even. The roadhouse where this happened, the nail on 50, Ryder Harlan Vance has been trying to buy that property for 4 years. The owner keeps refusing. And the woman. What about her?" "Her last name is Briggs. Her father was Earl Briggs. Worked for Vance Land Group as a survey contractor for 6 years. Left the company abruptly. Died in a car accident on a county road 2 years later." Ryder's hand tightened on the phone. "Hit and run," he said. "Cause undetermined," Deke said. "Driver never found." "And Ryder." He paused. "Earl Briggs. I ran the name. He was on site at the Callan property on Route 89 in October 2017. Ryder was very still on the shoulder of Highway 50. The desert stretched flat in both directions. The sky was the pale absolute blue of high desert morning, and it meant nothing. "The Callan property," he said. "Adjacent to your compound," Deke said. 18 months before the fire. The fire that killed Ryder's wife. The fire that killed his daughter. The fire that the state investigation had listed as cause undetermined, and that Ryder had spent 7 years carrying as the specific and permanent weight of a thing that had happened to him that no one had ever answered for. Silence on the line, long enough that Deke did not fill it because Deke understood that some silences were not empty. "She does not know any of this," Ryder said. It was not a question. "She is a bartender who just lost her job," Deke said. "She has a daughter. She does not know anything." Ryder looked at the highway ahead of him. Then he looked in the mirror at the direction he had come from. "I'm turning around," he said. "Figured," Deke said and hung up. Ryder sat on the shoulder for another moment. He thought about a woman standing at a bar rail at 12:31 in the morning with her spine straight and her jaw set and her eyes bright with a heat that was not defeat and would not be. He thought about Deke's voice saying the Callan property.
He thought about 7 years of riding without direction and arriving somehow at a roadhouse on the specific stretch of highway where all of it had started. He did not believe in providence. He had seen too much to believe in the organized mercy of the universe. But he believed in the structure of things, in the way events accumulated into patterns if you were willing to stand back far enough to see the shape, and the shape of what Deke had just described was not coincidence. He turned the bike around. He sat on the shoulder for a moment before he opened the throttle. Not from hesitation. From the particular deliberateness of a man who has learned to account for what he is about to do before he does it, because the life he had led for the first half of it had required that accounting, and the habit did not leave when the circumstances changed. He thought about his wife. She had been a journalist. Not the kind that appeared on television or covered the events that people chose to cover because they were visible and safe. The kind that went toward the things that were not safe, because the things that were not safe were the things that needed to be covered. She had understood that and chosen it, and he had understood her choice, even when it frightened him, which was most of the time. He had not been there when it mattered. He had been 2 states away on a run that had seemed important enough at the time, and he had been living with that specific weight ever since. Not just the grief of the loss, but the specific, irresolvable weight of the absence at the moment when his presence might have been the thing that changed the outcome. He could not resolve that. There was no resolution available. There was only the choice made daily about what to do with what remained. He opened the throttle and rode west through the desert morning, back toward Ely, back toward the first thing in 7 years that had felt like it required him to be specifically himself in a specific place, rather than simply anyone moving through. In a hotel suite in Elko, Nevada, Harlan Vance was eating breakfast with the specific, unhurried deliberateness of a man who eats every meal like it is a business meeting, which is to say, with utensils held correctly and no wasted motion, and the quiet confidence of someone who has not had to wait for anything in a very long time. He was 65 years old, Harlan Vance, and he did not look it. He was trim, careful with the silver hair of a man who had decided that silver could read as distinguished rather than old if you carried it correctly, and he carried it correctly. He wore a pressed shirt and no tie, the precise calculation of a man who understood that projecting power in casual settings required the removal of exactly one formal element while retaining all the others. His assistant had briefed him on the video at 7 in the morning. He had watched it twice, the second time with the sound off, studying the faces. He had watched Preston's performance with the quiet internal accounting of a father who has spent 26 years measuring the gap between what his son should be and what he is, and has made his peace with the fact that the gap will not close on its own. Preston was not cruel by design. He was thoughtless in the way of men who have grown up inside structures so thoroughly insulated from consequence that consequence itself has become abstract. You could educate that out of a person. You could correct it over time. It required patience and the willingness to make a lesson out of a mistake. Harlan Vance intended to have that conversation with his son at a later time. The immediate matter was different. The bartender's name was Nora Briggs. His assistant had that within 2 hours. Her father was Earl Briggs, which was the name that arrived in Harlan Vance's consciousness with the particular weight of a thing you have been watching from a distance for a long time and have been managing with reasonable care and have been hoping was fully handled. Earl Briggs had worked for Vance Land Group for 6 years. Earl Briggs had been present during the acquisition processes for 11 separate properties along Highway 50. Earl Briggs had resigned without notice and had refused to answer 2 subsequent calls from Harlan's operations director. 14 months later, Earl Briggs had died on a county road in what the sheriff's office had listed as a hit and run by an unknown driver. What Harlan Vance knew, which the sheriff's office did not know, was that Earl Briggs had not been as careful with his professional observations as his employment contract had required. What Harlan Vance had suspected, which he had managed as suspicion rather than confirmed knowledge for 4 years, was that Earl Briggs had kept records. Now, Earl Briggs's daughter was on the internet. Her face was on every platform connected to a story about his son. She had been fired from her job because Harlan had made 2 calls, and Rod Pittman at the Nail was a man who understood how the world worked. That was containable. What was not yet clear was what she had, what her father had left her if anything, what she knew if anything. Harlan set down his coffee. He sat at the table for a moment, looking at nothing in particular, which was the thing he did when he was thinking seriously. He had a reputation among the people who worked for him for this specific quality of stillness, the silence of a man processing information rather than avoiding it. His operations director, who had been with him for 12 years, had learned to read the length and quality of these silences as a measure of the seriousness of whatever he was considering. A 15-second silence meant he was deciding. A 30-second silence meant the situation required resources. What had just happened, which had produced a silence of over a minute, meant something was being fundamentally reconsidered. The video was a problem in the way that most problems were problems not because of the event itself, but because of what the event made visible. Preston's behavior at that roadhouse was not exceptional. It was the predictable output of a young man who had grown up watching his father manage the world with sufficient money and sufficient leverage that the world had always reorganized itself around his preferences. Preston had absorbed that lesson the way children absorb lessons from parents completely unconsciously and without the ability to distinguish between what was being modeled and what was true. The problem was not Preston. The problem was the woman, and the problem behind the woman, and the question of what the woman's dead father had kept. Harlan picked up the phone that went to Garrett. "Be discreet about it," he said. He hung up. He finished his breakfast. He looked out the window at the desert highway 20 stories below and felt the particular cold steadiness of a man who has managed problems for 30 years without being touched by them and sees no structural reason why this one should be different. Nora found the note on her windshield when she came out of the grocery store at 2 in the afternoon. Not a ticket, not a flyer. A piece of paper folded once with her name on it. Her full name, Nora Jean Briggs. Her middle name was not on anything public. She stood in the parking lot with the paper in her hand and felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise before she unfolded it. 4 sentences printed in a plain font, no signature. You need to stop speaking to the media. What happened at the bar was nothing. Your daughter walks to school alone every Tuesday and Thursday. What can happen to a child is not nothing. Nora read it twice. Then she looked up slowly and looked at the parking lot the way you look when you know you are being watched and might still be. Cars in their rows. A woman loading bags. An older man near the cart return. Nobody watching. Nobody obvious. She got in her truck and locked the door. Her hands started shaking about 30 seconds later. Not from fear, though fear was present. From the specific rage of a woman who has done everything she was supposed to do to keep her life manageable and still ended up in a parking lot reading a note about her child. She had not spoken to any media. She had refused both interview requests. She had posted nothing. She had been in the way she was always careful to be exactly as small and quiet as the situation required. It had not been enough. She pulled out her phone. She had one number given to her through the roadhouse cook who had gotten it from one of the regulars, who had gotten it from the man who had left with the other 2 bikers the previous night. She called. It rang 4 times. "Yeah," said the voice. "Deke," flat unhurried. "This is Nora Briggs," she said. Her voice was steady because she made it steady. "From the bar last night. I got your number from Calvin. I need—" She stopped, started again. "I got a note on my car about my daughter." Deke was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is not absence but assessment. "Where are you?" "Parking lot of the Ridleys on Main." "Don't go home," he said. She almost said something. She didn't. "Is Chloe at school?" "She's at school until 3. Leave her there for now. She's safer in a building with people than at home. Drive to the roadhouse, stay inside, stay where people can see you." "You said don't go home. The roadhouse is next to my home." Roadhouse first, he said. Rider's 20 minutes out. Rider's coming back. A pause. Short. The pause of someone who has said the amount they intended to say. He never really left. Deke said. He hung up. Nora sat in the truck for a moment with the phone in her hand and the note on the passenger seat and the grocery bags shifting slightly in the truck bed when a car moved past. Then she started the engine. She drove to the nail and parked in the back and went inside, and Calvin, who was still the afternoon cook, despite the fact that his boss had fired the bartender that morning, gave her coffee without being asked, and looked at her with the expression of a man who has worked in roadhouses long enough to know when something is happening and knows better than to ask about it. She sat at the bar and held the coffee and waited. Ryder came through the door 19 minutes later. He did not look like a man who had been riding since dawn. He looked like a man who had decided something and arrived having decided it, which in her experience was a different thing entirely from a man who was still working through the decision. He sat down across from her. She pushed the note across the bar without speaking. He read it standing, then sat. "Tell me about your father," he said. She blinked. "What?" "Your father, Earl Briggs. What did he do for work?" "How do you know my father's name?" "Because in the last 14 hours, I've found out that the man whose son assaulted you last night has been trying to acquire the property this roadhouse sits on for 4 years, and that your father worked for his land company until he didn't, and then he died on a road he had driven 1,000 times in an accident nobody solved." He looked at her steadily. "And because Harlan Vance has been buying land on this corridor for 15 years. One of the properties adjacent to the parcels he acquired in 2017 was the one I lived on, with my wife and my daughter. The afternoon light through the roadhouse windows was the low amber of desert late afternoon, and it fell across the bar surface between them, and neither of them moved in it. My wife and my daughter, Ryder said, died in a fire in October 2017. The investigation listed the cause as undetermined. It was not undetermined, but the people who could have made it otherwise had other priorities." Nora's throat was tight. She picked up her coffee, set it down. "My father," she said, carefully, "worked for Vance Land Group for 6 years. He was a survey contractor. He quit in March of 2021 without telling anyone why. He was different after my mother said. Quieter. He started locking things." "What things?" "The study. A cabinet. He had a fireproof box he bought from a hardware store that I saw once and never again. He told my mother it was tax documents. She believed him because my father was the kind of man who had always been careful about taxes." She stopped. Her jaw tightened in the specific way it did when she was navigating something difficult by force of will. "He died 14 months after he quit. They called it a hit and run. I was 23. My mother had Chloe to raise. I had Chloe. We didn't." "Didn't what?" She looked at him directly. "We didn't have the bandwidth to push. You understand? We knew it was wrong. We knew it wasn't an accident. And we did not have the time or the money or she paused, the margin," she said. "We didn't have the margin to fight." Ryder was quiet. His hands rested on the bar, and she could see the old scarring across the knuckles of his right hand, the kind of scarring that takes years to accumulate. "His belongings," Ryder said. "After he died, what happened to them?" Nora looked at the bar surface. Her chest had developed a particular pressure in it, the kind that comes when you know the answer to a question is going to change things, and you have not yet decided if you are ready for things to change. "My mother kept them for a while," she said slowly. "After she died 3 years ago, I took what was left. I have boxes at the house. I never went through them." She looked up. "I kept meaning to go through them when Chloe was older." Ryder looked at her for a moment. Then, "You need to go through them today." She stared at him. "Right now." "Right now," he said. "Because the person who left that note on your windshield is not going to wait for you to be ready. A beat." "Why are you doing this?" she said. "You don't know me. You stopped in for a coffee last night." He was quiet for a moment in the way she was beginning to understand was his version of consideration. Not hesitation. Consideration. The deliberate holding of a thing before answering. 7 years ago, he said someone I loved found out something about a powerful man. He paused. She did not have anyone standing with her when it went wrong. He looked at his hands. I have been living in the consequence of that for 7 years. He met her eyes. I am not going to sit in a corner booth again. Nora looked at him. She understood from the specificity of what he had not said that the answer to her question was also the answer to a much larger question, and that the two answers were connected in a way that neither of them had fully mapped yet. She pushed back from the bar. The boxes are at the house, she said. I need to get Chloe from school first. He nodded. I'll follow. Chloe had taken one look at Ryder when they picked her up from school and delivered the specific, unadorned assessment of children who have not yet learned to veil their observations. He looks like he's been in a lot of fights. He has, Nora said. Did he win? Ryder, who had been listening, said mostly. Chloe considered this. She nodded with the gravity of someone filing a piece of data in the appropriate folder. Then she climbed in the truck and spent the drive home reading a library book about ocean ecosystems with the easy absorption of a child who finds the world endlessly interesting when it is not being immediately threatening. The boxes were in the back of Nora's bedroom closet, 3 of them cardboard taped and sealed. She had moved them twice without opening them. Each time she had looked at the tape, yellowed and slightly brittle now, and thought, not yet. Not until Chloe is old enough to understand. Not until I have the time to do it properly. Not until I'm ready. She stood in her bedroom with Ryder behind her and Chloe in the doorway of the hall and felt the weight of not yet resolve into now in the specific way things resolve when circumstances take the decision out of your hands. She opened the first box. Tax files. Client folders. Survey contracts organized alphabetically, precisely the way her father had organized everything. Nothing immediately obvious. She moved to the second box. More folders older. Project documentation. Property surveys for parcels she did not recognize the names of. The third box was different, heavier. She cut the tape and folded the top back and found not files but other things. A laptop old, the screen cracked diagonally. A small zipper pouch, the kind used for travel documents, combination locked. A manila envelope with her name on it in her father's handwriting. Her full name, Nora Jean. The handwriting precise and careful and somehow formal in the way it almost never was. Like he had written it, knowing it would be the last thing he wrote to her. She looked at the envelope for a long moment. Ryder was very still behind her. She opened it. Inside a key, small the kind for a padlock, and a single index card with 2 lines in her father's handwriting. Fireproof box is in the storage unit on 6th. Lock combination is Chloe's birthday +1. I am sorry I could not tell you this in person. You will understand why I couldn't. She turned the index card over. On the back in smaller handwriting, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Trust the man who finds you first. Nora turned the index card over. She read both sides again. She put it down on the nightstand. She looked at Ryder. He was reading over her shoulder, and his face had the quality she had seen in it once before, briefly the quality of a man absorbing something that landed in a place that had been waiting a long time for something to land there. Your father knew you would need help, he said. Nora looked at the card again. Trust the man who finds you first. It could have meant anything, she told herself. It was written by a man who was afraid and running out of time and was trying to give her something useful without knowing the shape of what she would face. She looked at Ryder Steele. 54 years old, Iron Vulture's MC, former Army Ranger, a man her father had never met, but had somehow in his careful and frightened way anticipated. Or it could mean exactly what it said. Where is the storage unit? Ryder asked. She was already standing. The storage facility on 6th was the kind of place that existed in every small Nevada town, a row of corrugated metal doors on a lot fenced with chain link, run by a man who knew her father and had kept the unit in family access after his death because he was that kind of man. The unit was number 14. The padlock was a combination model 4 digits. Chloe's birthday plus one her father had written April 7th, so 0408. The lock opened on the first try. Inside was everything her father had locked away: the fireproof box, a small document case, 3 additional labeled boxes of files, and on top of the fireproof box, in a sealed plastic bag held with rubber bands, the notebook. Black and white speckled cover, the kind you buy for $1.50 at a pharmacy, the kind her father had used for everything from grocery lists to professional notes because he believed in the simplicity of paper for things that mattered. She picked it up, held it in both hands. Her father's handwriting covered every page: dates, numbers, property identifiers, names she did not recognize, names she did recognize: a county assessor, a state senator she had voted for twice, which landed in her chest with a specific unpleasant weight, a federal land management official who had appeared in the news 2 years ago in connection with a zoning appeal Nora had not paid close attention to. She turned pages. The documentation was meticulous. Her father had been an accountant by training, a surveyor by practice, and a meticulous observer of the relationship between the two, which meant that what he had kept was not merely notes, but a reconstructed record: property values before and after acquisition, acquisition methods noted in abbreviated form, and an ascending scale of pressure tactics documented in the dry, precise language of a man who was trying to keep his own reaction out of the record. Near the middle of the notebook, a page with a header underlined twice: Highway 50 Acquisitions, 2016 to 2022. Below it, a list of properties with dates and acquisition methods. Several were marked with a small star. 3 were marked with a capital F. She turned to the next page. Near the bottom, in slightly smaller handwriting, as though her father had added it after and run out of space: RS Compound, October 2017. F. Source G. Confirmed intentional. HV direct order. Nora stared at the letters. RS, October 2017. F. Behind her, she heard Ryder make a sound that was not quite a sound, the smallest possible involuntary response to something that had been waiting 7 years to be confirmed on a page. She turned. He was reading over her shoulder, and his face had gone to the absolute stillness of a man receiving information he has been living on the other side of for so long that the confirmation of it feels not like a shock, but like a door finally closing on a room he has been trying not to look into. She said his initials, carefully. He did not answer. He did not need to. Her father had known. Her father had been on that land. Her father had documented what happened to the steel compound, to the fire that killed Ryder's wife and daughter, and he had locked it away and died on a county road before he could decide what to do about it, and the man who had ordered all of it had been buying land on this highway for 15 years and was now looking for what Earl Briggs had kept. "We need to move," Ryder said. His voice was very controlled, every word placed deliberately. He pulled out his phone. "I know a place," he said. "Somewhere safe. I need you and Chloe to come with me tonight." Nora looked at the notebook in her hands. She looked at the storage unit shelves, the careful, frightened preservation of a man trying to leave something behind that would matter. She thought about February. She thought about the oil change and the medication and the margin that was gone. Then she put all of that aside because the margin did not matter if Chloe was not safe, and the note on the windshield had made one thing very clear. She looked at Ryder. "Where are we going?" she said. He was already dialing. "East," he said. The Iron Vultures compound sat 42 miles east of Ely, on a stretch of desert road that did not appear on the navigation app Nora used on her phone, and was not supposed to. It had been built over 11 years by men who had spent enough of their lives in places where someone else controlled the exits and had decided collectively, and without a formal vote, that they were finished with that arrangement. From the highway, it looked like nothing. A gravel turnoff marked with a reflector post, a quarter-mile of access road that curved behind a low ridge, and then the compound itself, a main garage structure large enough for 12 bikes, and then some 2 outbuildings, a main house that had been added to incrementally over the years as need required, and around all of it, a perimeter fence that was not decorative. Above the main garage bay door painted in red letters that had been there so long they had faded to the color of old brick. "You're safe here." Nora had been prepared for something from a movie. She had been gripping the door handle of Ryder's truck the whole way from Ely, cataloging her own fear with the same precision she brought to her monthly budget, identifying it, categorizing it, deciding what she could afford to let it cost her. She had expected dark, loud, men who looked through you. She found 12 men who between them held 4 Purple Hearts, 2 Silver Stars, 1 kidney transplant, and a combined total of 19 years in VIA waiting rooms that had never given them what they deserved. She found a hand-lettered sign she had not expected. She found a woman named Carla Deek's wife, silver-haired and 61, who had the particular calm authority of someone who had seen every category of emergency and found none of them as disorienting as people expected, who took one look at Nora and Chloe standing in the compound yard with a cardboard box between them and said, "Kitchen's in the back. I made chili. Sit down before you fall down." Chloe ate 1.5 bowls. She asked Carla 3 questions about the dog-eared paperback on the kitchen counter, which turned out to be a mystery novel, and they discussed the genre with the serious engagement of 2 people who took reading seriously and recognized that quality in each other. Within 20 minutes, Chloe was at the kitchen table with her own book and Carla's reading glasses, which were too large for her face and which she wore anyway with the serene practicality of a child who identifies a solution and implements it. Nora stood at the main table in the garage and spread her father's notebook open and did not eat anything. She had been to many places in her adult life that had claimed to be safe without meaning it. The urgent care clinic that told you not to worry until they handed you a bill you could not pay. The landlord's apartment viewing with its too bright smile and its list of restrictions that only made sense later. The job interview where the man across the desk never once looked above her collarbone. She knew the performance of safety, the way it was deployed as a marketing tool, a reassurance designed to get you to lower your guard before the real situation became apparent. The compound did not perform. The sign above the door had been painted by someone who was not thinking about how it looked to visitors. It had been painted because someone meant it, and the meaning had soaked into the paint over the years, the way meaning does when it is genuine, becoming not brighter but more real, less visible from a distance, and unmistakable up close. She looked at the notebook. She looked at the names her father had written in his careful accountant's hand. She looked at the dates beside the acquisition entries and calculated the way she always calculated what those dates meant in terms of the people who had been living on those properties when the code complaints started, when the insurance claims arrived, when the pressure became something that could not be managed. There was a family with 3 children listed in one margin note. A notation relocated, no destination recorded. She read it and felt the specific weight of a person who has been a single mother in a state that does not make it easy to absorb a sudden dislocation, and imagined the specific version of that weight multiplied by 3 children and the particular helplessness of having nowhere recorded to go. Her father had written it down. He had not been able to stop it. He had written it down and locked it away and died 14 months later, and the family with 3 children had gone somewhere without a destination recorded, and Harlan Vance had continued buying land. She turned the next page and the next. Ryder stood at the far end with Deke and 2 other senior members. Bull, who was 60 years old and built in the way the name suggested and communicated primarily through the angle of his head and the particular quality of his silences. And Priest Conrad Weaver, 58, who had been an Army chaplain for 14 years before he came home and found that civilian life had not saved space for him the way it had promised to, and who now handled what the club referred to quietly as their community operations, which included a food bank connection in Ely and a rotating veteran support arrangement that the members did not advertise because advertising it would have changed what it was. priest had a voice like water finding the bottom of a well, low measured, shaped by years of delivering information that could not be softened. He turned the notebook pages with deliberate care. He documented everything priest said. He was not stating an opinion. He was completing a calculation. Account transfers, property acquisition chronology, bribe payments described in the shorthand of a man who needed the record to exist, but also needed it to be deniable if it was found before he intended it to be found. He turned to the Highway 50 section, cross-referenced with county code violation filings, insurance claim dates. He turned another page. 3 properties he has marked with F. He turned the notebook toward Ryder. Each F entry has a date and an adjacent notation. Look at this one. October 2017, F source G confirmed, HV direct order. The room was quiet. Bull looked at the entry, then at Ryder. Deke looked at the entry, and then at the wall behind Ryder, which was the way Deke processed information that had emotional weight. He looked at something neutral and gave himself a moment. Ryder was already looking at the next page. His face was the flat, controlled surface of a man managing something large and choosing not to perform it. "Who is G?" Nora asked from the other end of the table. Nobody answered immediately. Then Ryder said very quietly, "Garrett." He looked up. His eyes were steady. He used to work county code enforcement. Lost the job in 2015 for evidence irregularities. Vance Land Group hired him within the year. He has been running ground operations for Vance for 9 years. "Your father," Ryder said to Nora, "had a source inside Vance's operation, someone who confirmed the fire was intentional, someone who knew the direct order came from Harlan Vance." Nora had her hands flat on the table. She was looking at the F notation and the date and trying to hold the full weight of what she was looking at. Her father had known. He had been employed by the man who had ordered a family killed. He had documented it. He had carried it for years. And then he had died on a county road. "He tried to walk away," she said. "He thought if he disappeared quietly, we would be safe." "He was protecting you," Carla said from the kitchen doorway. "Gentle, direct, the way women say the hard things when the men are still processing." "He is gone," Carla said. "And you are not." She nodded at the notebook. "So the question is not why he did not tell you. The question is what you do now." The room held that for a moment. From the kitchen, Chloe's voice, precise and 8 years old, asking Carla whether the mystery novel had a sequel. Carla answered without looking away from Nora. 3 of them. All good. Then she looked at Nora and waited. Nora straightened. She looked at Ryder. She looked at the notebook, at the locked document case from the storage unit, which Torres Ryder's contact in Reno, a former federal analyst who had left the Bureau on his own terms and kept the useful parts of what he knew had confirmed by phone, likely contained digital backup material. "What do we do with it?" she said, not asking, thinking out loud the way she planned, methodically accounting for obstacles. Ryder said, "We make copies, multiple copies. We get them to people who cannot be pressured into destroying them. We get the locked case open and we see what your father kept on the drive inside. And we do all of this tonight before Harlan Vance finishes figuring out what you have." He paused. "Torres can be here in 3 hours. He has a contact at the FBI field office in Las Vegas, an agent named Mora, who has been building a financial crimes case against Vance Land Group for 2 years. She has been missing the source material." Nora looked at the notebook. "That is the source material," she said. "That is the foundation of it," Ryder said. "Yes." "Okay," she said. She said it the way she had said, "let go" at the roadhouse the previous night, quietly, with finality, like the word was the announcement of a decision already made rather than the making of it. Torres arrived at the compound at 10 that night with a toolkit in a hard case and the particular unhurried confidence of a man who has opened harder things than a locked document pouch in worse conditions than a garage in eastern Nevada. He was 50 years old and built narrow with close-cropped gray hair and the careful, observant quality of someone who had spent years in rooms where reading people accurately was a professional requirement. He had the pouch open in 28 minutes. He extracted a small drive, plugged it into an air-gapped laptop he had brought himself, and pulled up the contents with the slow deliberateness of someone who had learned not to rush the first look at something that might be significant. "Your father was thorough," Torres said. "He was an accountant," Nora said. She was sitting beside him. "He was more than that." Torres scrolled. 9 years of documentation. Transaction records going back to the first Vance Land Group acquisition on the corridor. Scanned originals of wire transfer authorizations. Correspondence between Harlan Vance and 2 county officials about zoning variances that were purchased rather than approved. He stopped scrolling. And here, he leaned forward slightly. He has a recorded conversation. The room went entirely still. Nora looked at Torres. She looked at the laptop screen. She was aware of the particular quality of silence that had descended on the garage, the silence of 9 or 10 men who have been in difficult situations before and know the feeling of a moment that is about to change the shape of everything. She was also aware of her own breathing, which had become deliberate in the way it became deliberate when she needed to keep herself together for something. She had been managing her breathing for 36 hours. She could manage it a little longer. "Play it," Ryder said. Torres looked at Nora. She nodded once. The recording was 7 minutes long. The audio quality was good, the professional quality of a small recorder placed deliberately rather than a phone propped against something. Her father's voice, first controlled and careful with the slightly formal precision of a man who was recording himself for posterity and wanted the record to be clear. And then the second voice. Nora had heard Harlan Vance speak twice in news coverage. The voice on the recording was unmistakable smooth, measured with the particular register of a man who is never uncertain, because uncertainty is a condition he has arranged his life to eliminate. "You know what you have is incomplete," Harlan said on the recording. "You know that anything you think you can prove I can answer. I have resources, Earl. You have a daughter to raise." Her father's voice. "I have everything, Harlan. All of it. The acquisitions, the payments, the fire on the steel property." A pause, long enough to be a response in itself. "What do you want?" Her father. "I want to give it to someone I trust and walk away. I want to disappear from your life and you from mine. I want my daughter left alone. I want this to be finished." Another pause. "You should have come to me sooner," Harlan said. And then the recording ended. 4 months after that recording, Earl Briggs had died on a county road. Nora was not crying. Her face had the particular quality of a person receiving the confirmation of something they have always suspected and have been simultaneously hoping and dreading to have confirmed, because confirmation means that the thing is true and was always true and cannot now be untrue. And the grief in that is a different kind of grief from the grief of not knowing. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands. "He tried to make a deal," she said. "He thought if he offered to disappear, he would be allowed to." She looked up at Ryder. "Harlan Vance has never faced a real consequence," she said. "In 30 years, not one thing that actually cost him anything." Ryder met her eyes. "He will," he said. "How?" Her voice was not pleading. It was the direct tactical question of a woman who had been doing math since she was 23 and was now doing it again with different numbers. "He has lawyers and politicians and resources, and we have a notebook and a drive and a recording that his legal team will argue the provenance of for 6 months while he moves money and destroys anything we missed." "We do not go to his lawyers," Ryder said. "And we do not go to the county sheriff who has been cashing his checks for a decade. We go direct." He looked at Torres. "Sandra Mora at the FBI field office." Torres was already reaching for his phone. "She has been building toward Vance for 2 years, Torres said. "She has been missing source documentation." He held up the drive. "This is source documentation. Call her," Ryder said. Nora looked at the table while Torres dialed. She looked at the notebook, the drive, the recording now playing in her memory. She looked at the room around her, these men who had come to a compound 42 miles from anywhere because something in their lives had required them to build a place that answered to nobody but themselves, and had decided quietly and without announcement, to make that place available to people who needed it. She thought about her father sitting across from Harlan Vance in whatever room that recording had been made in. She thought about the specific courage it had taken to press the record button and to say, "I have everything, Harlan." She thought about him going home afterward to her mother and to a version of herself she barely remembered, 14 years old and completely unaware, and sitting down to dinner and not saying a word. The grief in that was not simple. It had layers. It had the layer of the father she had lost, and the layer of the years she had not understood, and the layer of the thing he had done that was more than she had known how to ask for and less than enough to save himself. She was still the person who would have to carry it. That was not going to change, but she was carrying it now with more of the shape of it visible, and that was different from carrying a weight you cannot see. Torres hung up the phone at 11:43. The look on his face told Ryder everything before he said a word. "Mora is moving tonight," Torres said. "She wants Garrett in a room within 6 hours. Nora looked at the drive. 6 hours. "Ryder," she said, "you need to come outside." The truck had been at the end of the access road for 35 minutes before Bull noticed it. No plates visible, covered or removed, impossible to tell in the dark. No movement. Engine running, lights off. Just sitting there at the edge of the compound sightline like something waiting for a decision to be made. Ryder stood outside with Bull and Deke and looked at it. The desert night was cold and clear and very quiet, the kind of quiet that makes sounds carry farther than they should. "Could be nothing," Deke said. He said it without inflection, which meant he did not believe it. "How many?" Ryder asked. "At least 2 in the truck." Bull's voice was low, his head tilted slightly in the way it did when he was processing spatial information. He was looking in the other direction toward the east side of the property, where the terrain dropped toward a shallow wash. His head came up. "Second vehicle. East side. Came in quiet." "They are boxing us," Deke said. Ryder turned and went back inside. He did not run. Running communicated panic, and panic spread. He walked with purpose, and the men who saw his face straightened, and the room shifted temperature the way rooms do when the people in them understand simultaneously that something has changed. "We have company," Ryder said. 2 approaches east and west. "Torres, pull everything off that laptop to the drive and get the drive to Nora now." He looked at Carla. "Take her and Chloe to the back room, the one with the second exit." He looked at his men. "Nobody acts until I know what we are dealing with. We are not starting anything tonight, but we finish it if it comes to that." Nora heard him from the hallway. "Chloe is already with Carla," Ryder said before she could speak. "The drive goes with you. If this goes wrong, you go out the east exit. You keep going. There is a town 2 miles that direction. You call Torres's number. You keep that drive away from these people." She looked at him. The sound of gravel outside, closer now. The sound of engines. "Go," he said. She went. What happened in the following 9 minutes was not the kind of thing that looks the way it looks in movies, where the choreography has been designed for visibility and the pacing accommodates an audience. This was fast and specific and left no space for observation. The men who came for the Iron Vulture's compound that night were not local. They carried equipment they had no legal authorization to carry in Nevada. They came with the coordinated approach of professionals who had been briefed on the layout and expected limited resistance. They had been given accurate information about the number of people inside. They had been given inaccurate information about what the people inside were capable of. The encounter lasted 7 minutes. 3 of the men who came for the compound left the compound with injuries sufficient to require hospital attention. One Iron Vulture's member, Hatch, 62 years old, and a veteran of 2 foreign deployments, took a blow to the left shoulder that cracked his collarbone. He went down. He got back up. He continued with one arm. Nobody who saw it forgot it. Ryder encountered the man directing the operation at the east perimeter. The man was broad and gray-haired and carried himself with the specific bearing of someone who had once been a law enforcement officer and had then moved into a category of work where the law was a variable rather than a constraint. He stopped when he saw Ryder. Something moved through his face that was not quite surprise, and not quite guilt, but was in the vicinity of both. Garrett, Ryder said. The man's jaw tightened. His hand was at his side, not reaching for anything. Not yet. The fire, Ryder said. October 2017. You were there. Not a question. Garrett breathed. I followed orders. He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed saying and still cannot make sound acceptable. I did not know. They told me the property was empty. My wife and my daughter, Ryder said. His voice was controlled in the way of a man who has practiced this conversation in his head for 7 years and has arrived at it knowing exactly what he is going to say and how he is going to say it. Silence. Harlan gave the direct order, Garrett said. The words came out low and fast, like a man releasing weight he has been carrying too long. I have my own records. I kept everything. I knew something like this would come eventually, and I needed something to protect myself. Ryder looked at him for a long moment. You give all of it to the FBI, he said. Tonight. Everything you have. Every detail of the fire. Every order you followed. Every name. Garrett nodded. Once, slowly. The nod of a man who has been looking for a door and has just been shown one even if the door leads somewhere costly. Tonight, he confirmed. Inside the compound, Torres was on the phone with Agent Mora in Las Vegas. In the back room, Nora sat with the drive in both hands and Chloe sleeping against her shoulder, the child's breathing, the slow and total unconsciousness of someone who had finally run out of adrenaline, and Carla in the corner chair with her eyes open watching the door. They sat that way for 40 minutes. The compound settled back into quiet. Nora listened to the sounds and understood from their quality that the immediate crisis had passed and that a different kind of crisis was beginning. The kind that does not end in 9 minutes but in courtrooms and hearings and the slow grinding machinery of federal investigation. Ryder came to the back room at 12:20. He knocked before opening. She noticed that. He knocked. Mora is moving tonight, he said. Torres put everything in front of her, and the recording alone is enough for a federal warrant. She wants Garrett in a room within 6 hours. Nora looked at the drive. 6 hours. She handed it to him. He looked at it in his palm, small, smaller than his thumb. My father kept this for years, she said. He died for it. It sat in a storage unit on 6th Street. It means something now, Ryder said. Only if it gets to Mora. It gets to Mora, he said. She looked at him. Her father's note was still in her coat pocket. She was aware of it the way you are aware of things that have weight without being heavy. Who else knows we are here? She asked. The question arrived in the quiet of the back room with more weight than she had intended it to carry, and she saw Ryder receive it. Saw the fraction of a second in which something landed in him, not alarm, but the cold arriving certainty of a man whose experience tells him that the answer to that question is never the comfortable answer. He kept his face even. Get some rest, he said. I will be outside. He walked back into the main room and found Deke standing apart from the others with his arms crossed and a look on his face that Ryder knew from 15 years of reading that face in conditions where the reading mattered. Wade, Deke said. One word, just the name. Ryder said nothing. I went back through the timeline, Deke said, keeping his voice low. The truck outside was positioned 18 minutes after you outlined the plan. Not 20, not 30, 18. Nobody outside this compound knew the plan before you described it in this room, and Wade was in the hallway when you laid it out. He looked at Ryder. He volunteered for perimeter watch 20 minutes after the meeting. Very eager, very sudden. Where is he now? Garage, east side. Ryder walked to the garage. Wade was 27 years old, patched in 6 months ago, the youngest member by a decade. He was sitting on an overturned crate near the side door with the specific quality of stillness that belongs to men who are practicing looking casual and cannot make it natural. He looked up when Ryder came in. His face did the thing faces do when the body understands it has been seen. Ryder stopped in front of him. He did not raise his voice. He did not adopt a position designed to intimidate. He simply occupied the space directly in front of Wade with the total unrhetorical attention of a man who requires nothing more than that to establish the nature of what was happening.
"Tell me now," Ryder said. "All of it. Right now. Because what comes next depends entirely on whether I hear it from you first."
Wade lasted 4 seconds. Then he broke fast and completely the way people break when they have been holding something alone and someone with the right kind of authority gives them permission to put it down. It came out in a low, rapid, miserable recitation, the debts he had accumulated at a casino in Wendover over 8 months. The amount, the approach from a man he understood to be connected to Vance. The money that had appeared in his account the same day, the subsequent requests for information, the text he had sent tonight. He said it all without being prompted, the words arriving in the order they had been sitting in him waiting. When he finished, Ryder said, "What exactly did the last text say?" Wade swallowed. "That you had documents, that the woman had a notebook, that you were running protection at the compound." "Did you tell them about Torres?" "No. I did not know about Mora. I swear I did not know they were going to send people." "But you knew something would happen." Wade's jaw worked. "I told myself it would just be information, that they just wanted to know where she was and they would leave it alone." "Did you believe that?" A pause that contained its own answer. "I needed to believe it," Wade said. Ryder looked at him for a long moment, long enough for the weight of the evening to fully arrive on Wade's shoulders. Then he said, "Get up. You are going to sit in the main room where Deke can see you. When the federal agents arrive, you are going to tell them everything you just told me. Everything." He walked Wade to the main room and handed him to Deke with a look that communicated everything necessary. Then Carla appeared in the doorway of the main room, not with the calm of her previous appearances, but with the particular quality of presence she had when something required immediate attention. "Ryder," she said, "you need to come outside." He went. Bull fell in beside him without being asked, reading his face. "They know we are here," Ryder said quietly, walking. "They know she has documents. They do not know about Mora, or what Torres already transmitted." He looked toward the back room, which means Harlan Vance knows his first approach failed. A man like that stops sending other people. Bull was quiet for 2 seconds. Then he comes himself. "That is what I think," Ryder said. "Get everyone on full watch, all approaches." The sound reached them before he finished the sentence. Not from outside, from down the hallway, a door opening. And then Carla's voice raised, which was alarming because Carla did not raise her voice for manageable things. Ryder was moving before the sentence was complete. He reached the back room in 4 seconds. The door was open. Carla stood in the doorway with both hands pressed to her face. Chloe was upright on the cot, fully awake, her face the specific pale of a child who has understood something terrifying, her hands gripping the edge of the mattress, her inhaler on the nightstand untouched. "He took her," Chloe said. Her voice was completely flat. "A man came through the window and he took her." Ryder crouched to her level. "Did you see his face?" "No. It was dark." He put his hand over her mouth and she fought him. She bit his hand. Chloe's voice remained flat in the way of children who are managing themselves very carefully. "She told me to stay in the room no matter what I heard." "How long ago?" Chloe looked at the clock on the wall. She calculated with the precision of a child who has spent her life managing schedules around medication times. 6 minutes, she said. Ryder stood. He looked at the window. He looked at the dark desert outside it. He calculated the direction, the timing, the head start, and the limited number of large Vance properties on the Western Highway 50 corridor that were remote enough to hold someone and keep it quiet. There was one. He had looked at the property records Deke pulled. The Dalloway development site, 15 miles west, a resort project that had been permitted 2 years ago and then stalled, existing only as a foundation and a prefab operations office on a 60-acre parcel that Harlan Vance had acquired by means Earl Briggs had documented in a notebook now in Torres's possession. He was not certain. He was certain enough to move. He turned back to Chloe. She was still sitting on the edge of the cot, her hands gripping the mattress, her eyes on him. She had her mother's jaw, the specific quality of set determination that was structural rather than performed. He sat down next to her. "I'm going to get your mom," he said. She looked at him. She had the direct, evaluating gaze of a child who has been careful about trusting people and is applying that carefulness now. "She will be scared," Chloe said. "She does not show it, but she gets scared." "I know," Ryder said. "I need you to stay here with Carla," he said. "Can you do that?" She considered it. Her jaw was her mother's jaw. "Yes," she said, "but come back." She paused. "Both of you." Ryder looked at her for a moment. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the specific weight of the photograph. He did not have the weight of a 7-year absence that had been the particular texture of his life for so long it had become simply the texture of his life. He thought about an 8-year-old girl with an inhaler on the nightstand sitting straight on a cot in an Iron Vulture's compound, telling him to come back. "We will come back," he said. He stood. He went to Deke. He went to Bull. He went to Priest. 4 bikes. No headlights for the first mile, then lights and full throttle on the highway. 15 miles west in the dark. Ryder rode and thought about the woman and about his daughter and about the specific oblique way that the things you cannot undo have of showing up again in different forms, as though the universe has a limited number of situations and keeps rotating through them until someone handles them correctly. He did not believe in the universe as an intentional force. He had made his position on that clear to himself in the months after the fire and had not revised it since. But he believed in the structure of things, and the structure of this particular thing, a daughter whose father had kept a record and died for it, and a man who had lost his family to the same record and had been riding the wrong direction for 7 years, had a shape to it that he could recognize even if he could not explain it. He thought about the index card. "Trust the man who finds you first." Earl Briggs had written that not knowing who would find his daughter. He had written it hoping that whoever it was would be the right kind of person. He had taken that on faith, which was the specific courage available to people who have run out of all other options, the courage to trust that the universe which had not been kind to them would at least be correct. The highway unrolled under the bikes. The desert on both sides was dark and vast, and the stars above it were the real stars, not the diluted version near cities, and they did not offer any opinion on what was happening below them. 15 miles was 12 minutes at the speed they were running. 12 minutes was enough time to think about all of it and arrive at the development site with the thinking done and nothing left to do but what came next. Nora was not what Harlan Vance expected. He had built a picture of her from the file Garrett had compiled, over 12 hours bartender, single mother, 2 jobs until this morning, 3 years of careful small-town management of a life that had very little margin for error. He had expected someone frightened, someone manageable, someone who could be addressed directly and efficiently and given the kind of offer that people in her category of situation could not afford to refuse. The woman sitting in the operations chair of his development site's prefab office at 1 a.m. was straight-backed and still and looked at him with eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of someone who had already decided something. He did not show the discomfort. "You are Earl Briggs's daughter," he said. Nora said nothing. "He was a good surveyor," Harlan said. "Reliable, meticulous." He paused, turning a glass of water slowly in his hand. He made the mistake that careful people sometimes make. He confused documentation for power. "He was right," Nora said. Harlan looked at her. His expression recalibrated slightly, the small adjustment of a chess player encountering an unexpected move. "Where is the drive?" he said. "Not here." "Where is it?" "With someone you cannot reach." She met his gaze. "It is already moving. You are already too late. You just do not know it yet." He turned to the window. He looked out at the dark desert. Nora used those 3 seconds. The woman who had brought her a bottle of water 20 minutes ago, one of Harlan's operations staff, a younger woman of about 30, who had looked at Nora when she set down the water bottle with something in her face that was not entirely absent of conscience, had set her phone on the chair arm beside Nora's zip-tied hands. Whether she had done it deliberately or carelessly, Nora did not know. She had made a calculation based on what she had seen in the woman's face, and she had acted on it. She had the phone in her zip-tied hands before Harlan turned back from the window. She found the camera. She switched to video. She found the live button, the button she knew from watching other people at other dull moments use for birthdays and county fairs, and she pressed it. She set the phone on her knee screen up facing Harlan. 1 bar of signal, it would have to be enough. Why Highway 50, she said. He turned back to her. He looked at her. He looked at the question. And Harlan Vance, 65 years old, worth $400 million untouched for 30 years, did the thing that powerful men who have operated without consequence for a long time always eventually do when placed in a room with someone they believe cannot use anything they say against them. He explained himself. He talked about the corridor. The resort development plan, 15 years in the making, 40 miles of Highway 50 converted from working-class highway stops and small farms into a premium destination development, the kind of thing that required land, acquired quietly and cheaply, and did not accommodate the complications introduced by people who declined to sell. He talked about the methods. He spoke of them with the flat practicality of a man who considers inconvenient people an engineering problem rather than a moral one. Code complaints, insurance pressure, the families who left, the few who had not left voluntarily. He talked about the vision of it, the resort strip, the casino development, the hotel properties he had been planning, each one positioned along the corridor, with the specificity of a man who has been living with a map in his head for 15 years and has memorized every square mile of it. He talked about it the way certain men talk about their ambitions when they believe the audience cannot use the information, with the serene total conviction of someone who has decided that what he wants is the same as what should happen, and that the people in the way of it are simply misunderstanding the direction of history. He mentioned the families who had been pushed out, using the passive voice, the construction of a sentence that describes an action without a subject, the grammatical equivalent of something that happened to people rather than something that was done to them. He mentioned the properties that had been cleared. He said cleared the way you say cleared when you mean burned or pressured or dismantled by the systematic application of regulatory harassment until the people living on them had no energy left to continue the fight. He mentioned fires. He used the passive voice, the way people use the passive voice when they want to acknowledge an action without claiming it. Structures that were cleared. Situations that were resolved. Nora kept her face neutral. The phone on her knee kept recording. 1 bar. She did not know if the signal was holding. She did not know if anyone was watching. She knew Harlan was still talking, so she kept him talking. She thought about the notebook, about the F entries, and the dates, and the neat, careful handwriting of a man who had been trying to tell the truth with the only tools available to him, and had paid for that with his life, and had not been able to make it matter while he was alive. She thought about her daughter's face in the back room at the compound, upright and pale, and holding herself together with the specific stubbornness she had from both sides of her family. She kept Harlan talking. The journalist, she said. 7 years ago. The woman on the steel property. The temperature of the room changed. She felt it. Harlan looked at her with a different kind of attention now, still assessing, but the assessment had changed in character. That was not my intention, he said carefully, but it happened. There are situations, he said, that develop in ways that are not entirely. He stopped. Managed. She had a daughter, Nora said, 6 years old. Silence. The first real silence of the conversation. The silence of a man who is not capable of feeling what a decent person would feel in that moment, but is capable of recognizing that it is a liability. Who else knows you are here, he said. The door opened. Ryder came through it the way he had crossed the floor of the roadhouse, without announcement, without theater, moving with the total and specific purpose of a man who has located what he came for and is closing the distance. 2 of Harlan's men moved. Bull and Priest, coming through behind Ryder, handled both of them. The sounds that followed were brief and conclusive, and left both men on the floor alive, which Ryder had specified on the ride over. Harlan backed up until he hit the wall. He looked at Ryder Steele, the man whose family he had arranged to have killed in October 2017, whose name he had read in a security file 48 hours ago, whose face he had studied in a grainy still image pulled from a roadhouse security camera. And for the first time in 30 years, Harlan Vance felt the specific cold of a man who has run out of space between himself and a consequence. "Wait," Harlan said. Ryder crossed the room to him. He did not hit him. He took Harlan by the collar of his pressed shirt, and he held him against the wall, and he looked at him from 8 inches away and said nothing. Just looked. The way you look at something you have been carrying for 7 years. "My wife," Harlan started. "Don't," Ryder said. "I can give you. I do not want anything from you," Ryder said. His voice was very controlled, each word exactly where he placed it. "I want you to still be breathing when the federal agents get here. That is the only thing I want from you right now, and I need you to understand exactly how much effort that is costing me." Harlan stopped talking. Ryder stepped back. He crossed to Nora. He pulled the folding knife from his pocket and cut the zip tie with one clean motion and held her arms steady as she stood because she had been sitting rigid for 90 minutes and her legs required a moment. She held up the phone. "1 bar, still live." "How long?" Ryder said. 13 minutes, she said. He looked at the phone, then at her. "You got him on camera," he said. "He likes explaining himself," she said. "Outside vehicles. Multiple moving fast from the highway, not motorcycles. Engines that belong to large vehicles moving with the authority of people who have legal standing and are not uncertain about using it." Deke appeared in the doorway. "Federal," he said. 4 vehicles. Mora must have been already heading this direction when Torres called. Torres appeared behind him. He looked at Nora. He looked at the phone. He looked at the live stream counter in the corner of the screen. The viewer count was climbing past 60,000 past 70, still climbing, the number ticking upward with the specific speed of something that had found its audience and was not finished. "That is going to be on every news platform in the country by morning," Torres said. "Good," Nora said. Outside, vehicle doors opened. Agent Sandra Mora's voice clear and carrying the particular authority of someone who has been building toward a moment for 2 years and is not wasting a second of it now that she has arrived, cut through the desert night. "Federal agents, nobody moves." Nora exhaled. The phone was still in her hand. The stream was still running. And across the internet at 1:37 in the morning, 73,000 people were watching a 65-year-old developer standing against a prefab office wall in the Nevada desert, his pressed shirt slightly wrinkled for the first time in a very long time, being looked at by a 38-year-old bartender with zip tie marks on her wrists and her dead father's drive in her pocket. The people watching in living rooms and hospitals and all-night diners and the kind of places people are awake at 1:37 on a Saturday morning saw something in Nora Briggs's face in that moment that they recognized even if they could not have named it. The look of a woman who has been afraid for a very long time and has in this specific moment completely stopped. Ryder stood beside her. He did not say anything. He did not need to. In the corner of the room, Harlan Vance looked at the phone in her hand and understood for the first time in 30 years that the thing he had spent 30 years maneuvering around had found him. Not the law, not lawyers. The truth, told by the daughter of the man he had killed to keep it quiet, traveling at the speed of a live stream to everywhere all at once. Agent Mora came through the door. Agent Sandra Mora was 44 years old and had been building the Vance Land Group case for 26 months. She had a whiteboard in her office in Las Vegas that she had stopped letting her team add to because it was full, and a filing system that her supervisor described as architecturally impressive and her colleagues described as obsessive, and a particular quality of focused energy that arrived with her whenever she entered a room, the energy of a person who has been moving toward something for a long time and has just arrived. She had agents on every exit before her vehicle fully stopped. She had Harlan Vance in federal custody with his rights read before he managed to recompose his face into anything resembling its usual expression. She had the drive from Nora's hand logged into evidence, photographed, documented, and in the care of her tech analyst within 14 minutes of walking through the door. She pulled Ryder aside while her team worked the room. "You understand I have about 40 questions," she said. "Ask them," Ryder said. The stream, Mora said.
It was at 73,000 viewers when I walked in. It is at 340,000 now. She studied him. She streamed it herself. She did everything herself, Ryder said. I just drove. Mora looked at him with the expression of someone deciding how much of what she was being told was intended to be taken literally. Then she said, Garrett, my people picked him up 20 minutes ago. He is talking. She paused. He has not stopped. She looked at Ryder steadily. He confirmed the fire. The steel compound, October 2017. He confirmed the order came directly from Harlan Vance. The words landed the way Ryder had known they would land, with the specific weight of a confirmation that is different from suspicion even when you have lived with the suspicion for 7 years. Suspicion leaves a door ajar. Confirmation closes it. He had been living in the room with that open door for 7 years. He had been managing the draft, coming through it, the cold reminder of a thing that had not been resolved, and he had structured his life around that draft because there was nothing else to do. You cannot close a door that has no handle on your side. The door was closed now. He nodded once. Will it hold? He said. Will it be enough to keep him from walking out of this in 6 months on a technicality? With Garrett's testimony, the drive documentation, the recording, the financial transfer records, and a live-streamed confession viewed by, she checked her phone currently, 412,000 people. She allowed herself the smallest possible version of a smile. Yeah, she said, it is going to hold. Nora found Chloe in the back of a federal vehicle with a blanket around her shoulders and Torres sitting beside her. And when Chloe saw her mother come around the side of the vehicle, she was out and moving before Nora could say her name. She hit her hard the way small people hit hard when they have been frightened and have been managing the frightened with everything they have and are now finished managing it. Nora took a step back and wrapped both arms around her and held on. Neither of them said anything for a long time. When Chloe pulled back, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady in the precise and composed way her mother's voice was steady by force of will rather than absence of feeling. I waited in the room, Chloe said. Like you said. I know, Nora said. Carla made me drink water. Good. Chloe looked at her mother's wrists at the marks the zip tie had left. She touched them gently with 2 fingers, the way she touched the bruises on her own knees when she fell assessing. Does it hurt? A little. Chloe looked at the site around them, the federal agents, the vehicles Harlan Vance being walked toward a transport in restraints. She processed it with the specific gravity of a child who takes things seriously. Is it over? She said. Nora looked at Harlan Vance. His posture was still upright, still attempting the dignity of a man accustomed to occupying spaces as though they belonged to him. But something had gone out of it. The specific quality of a man whose story has been told by someone other than him, whose empire has been described in detail by his own voice to 400,000 people he could not see and could not reach and could not manage. This part is, Nora said. What happened over the following weeks moved faster than anyone who had not watched a federal financial crimes case dismantle an empire from the inside would expect. Agent Mora had the architecture in place. What Earl Briggs's documentation gave her was not the beginning of the case, but the keystone, the piece that made everything else cohere. The offshore accounts matched the transfer records on the drive. The bribery payments correlated with zoning approvals that Mora's team had flagged, but could not yet source. The timeline of property acquisitions cross-referenced with Earl Briggs's documented methods gave her a pattern complete enough to survive cross-examination. Garrett's cooperation was thorough. He had kept his own records. People who operate in the space between legal and not for long enough always keep records because records are the only protection available to someone who has made themselves useful to a man who does not value loyalty beyond its utility. Garrett had kept his out of self-preservation and had spent 9 years hoping he would never need them. He needed them now. He gave everything. The county assessor resigned on a Tuesday. The state senator announced he would not seek re-election the following Monday. The federal land management official, whose name appeared in Earl Briggs's notebook, was placed under investigation within 3 weeks.
Each announcement arrived in Nora's awareness as a piece of information rather than a vindication, because vindication implies completion, and she had learned that the dismantling of something built over 30 years does not complete in weeks or months. It completes in increments through the slow machinery of institutions that were supposed to prevent what happened and are now correcting it, and the correction takes as long as it takes. She was sitting at the bar of the Nail, which Rod Pittman had rehired her to after 2 days of reflection and one conversation with a lawyer pouring coffee for the afternoon regulars, when the door opened and Preston Vance came in. She saw him before he saw her. She had approximately 3 seconds to decide what her face was going to do when he looked up. She put her face in neutral. He looked terrible. Not the rough night terrible of 3 weeks ago. Something more sustained the look of a person who has been sleeping badly for reasons that live inside them rather than outside the look of someone who has spent 3 weeks in the company of themselves and found the company difficult. He stopped at the bar. He looked at the counter. "I know you probably do not want to see me," he said. "I do not know what I want yet," Nora said, which was true. "Sit down." He sat. She poured him a coffee without being asked because she was a bartender, and it was automatic, and he looked at the cup with something in his face that was both gratitude and shame, and probably had not learned yet how to be one without the other. "I called Agent Mora's office," he said, 2 days after the compound, before the stream went everywhere. He wrapped his hands around the cup. "I found out where they were taking you. I gave them the address." Nora went still behind the bar. She looked at him. She thought about 4 federal vehicles arriving with a specificity that had seemed, even in the chaos, slightly faster than Torres's call alone should have produced. "You called them," she said. "Yeah." She waited. He looked at the counter, at his hands, at the space between them. "I watched what I did to you in here," he said. I laughed. He paused. And then I watched myself laughing on the security footage on the internet, and I tried to tell myself it was not that bad, and I could not do it. He looked up. And then I found out what my father had been doing. For 30 years. And I understood that I grew up inside of that, and I thought it was normal. I thought that was just how things worked. He looked at his coffee. People with power and people without it, and the space between them as something you navigated rather than questioned. He shook his head. "I was wrong," he said. Nora looked at him for a long moment. The afternoon light came through the roadhouse windows and fell on the bar between them, and neither of them moved in it. "You are going to spend a long time figuring out exactly how wrong," she said, "and I am not the person who is supposed to guide you through that." "I know." "But you did the right thing," she said. "When it mattered. That counts. It does not cancel what came before, but it counts." He nodded. He picked up the coffee, set it down. "I am sorry," he said. "I know that does not fix anything. I know it does not come close." Nora looked at him the way she had looked at the room on the night it all started, steady, clear, without flinching. Not forgiving, not performing forgiveness, just seeing. "I believe you," she said. It was not absolution. Both of them understood that. But it was true. And true was worth more in that particular moment than anything warm and easy would have been. He left 20 minutes later. Nora stood behind the bar and watched the door close and felt the particular complexity of a person who has learned that the world is not divided cleanly into people who cause harm and people who do not, but into people who cause harm and run from it and people who cause harm and eventually sometimes turn around. She refilled the coffee at table 3 and kept moving. The compound changed in the months that followed. Not in its structure, it was still the Iron Vulture's place, still 42 miles east of Ely, on the road that did not appear on navigation apps. But what happened inside it changed. What it was for changed. Priest put together the paperwork for a nonprofit with a lawyer in Elko and a name, Vulture's Watch. Community Protection Services. Carla ran the intake program, which helped women leaving dangerous situations find temporary housing, legal resources, and the specific kind of practical assistance that comes from people with no bureaucratic overhead and no patience for waiting. The program worked because Carla ran it the way Carla ran everything, with the precise, unsentimental care of someone who has been paying attention to what people actually need for long enough that she no longer confuses what they say they need with what will actually help them. She did not give speeches about empowerment. She helped women fill out paperwork. She called landlords. She drove people to appointments when the bus didn't go where the appointment was. She kept a folder of local resources that she updated every 3 months because resources changed and outdated information was worse than no information. Within the first 6 months, she had helped 32 women through situations that the official support systems would have taken 3 to 6 months to address if they had addressed them at all. Priest said, at the first meeting of the Vulture's Watch Board of Directors, which took place at the long table in the compound garage on a Thursday evening over chili and cornbread, I think we built something here that was supposed to exist a long time ago. Nobody disagreed. Torres helped connect them with the FBI's Victim Services Network, which gave them reach the club alone could not have had. The veterans came on their own the way they always had, not through advertising, but through the specific trust of one man telling another that this was a place where they would not be handled. Within 3 months, there were 8 veterans at the Thursday evening cookout. Within 6, there were 15. Hatch's collarbone healed. He complained about the physical therapy with impressive creativity and attended every session without missing one, which everyone pretended not to notice. Wade testified at his federal hearing. He received a reduced sentence for full cooperation, 8 months in county, and 2 years of probation. When he came back, the garage was not the same place it had been when he left it, not because of what he had done, but because of what had happened since, and because places change when the people in them change what the place is for. Deke told him he had 2 options, earn it back or do not come back. Wade stayed. He earned it slowly, without ceremony, without anyone making a speech about it. In January, Nora started the prerequisites for nursing school at Great Basin College. She was 38 years old, and the youngest person in her cohort was 20, and the oldest was 54, a retired ranch hand named Owen, who had decided that 54 was as good an age as any to start something new, and held this position with the serene authority of a man who had been arguing with difficult terrain his whole life and found classrooms comparatively manageable. On the first day, Nora sat beside a woman named Della, 61 years old, recently retired from 20 years as a school cook, who had arrived early and chosen the window seat and smiled at Nora when she came in. That was enough. The work was hard, in the specific way that good work is hard. It required her full attention in a way that left no room for the secondary calculations that had been running in the background of her mind for years. In the anatomy class, she learned the names of bones and the functions of muscle groups and the architecture of systems that kept people alive without their conscious participation. And she found in this knowledge the same thing she had found in bar management and budget precision and medication schedules and all the other domains in which she had become competent through necessity, the particular satisfaction of understanding how something actually worked. She was going to be good at this. She was already good at the parts of it that were about paying attention and not flinching and understanding what people needed before they had finished saying it. The clinical rotations would come later. She was ready for them. Chloe's medication was covered now by a victim compensation fund connected to the federal case. One of the outcomes nobody had specifically anticipated, but which Mora's office had quietly made possible. She was 9 by then. She had joined the school's reading club, which met on Thursdays, and was working her way through the Carla-recommended mystery series with the methodical focus of someone who found pleasure in things done properly. She still had the asthma. She still carried her inhaler in her backpack. She still required management, and she still managed it herself, but the weight of it was different now, because the weight of everything was different when the month had a margin. There is a thing that happens to people who have been afraid for a long time when the thing they were afraid of is finally actually over. It does not happen all at once. It happens in increments, like the body slowly releasing a held breath, It did not know it was holding a little at a time in specific moments when something ordinary occurs and the fear does not arrive alongside it the way it used to. For Nora, the first moment was 3 weeks after the verdict, standing in the parking lot of the grocery store on Main Street. She was loading bags into the truck, and a car pulled up close behind her, and she heard the engine, and she did not flinch. She noticed that she had not flinched. She stood there for a moment in the October afternoon with a bag of groceries in each hand and felt the specific unfamiliar quality of simply being in a parking lot without the secondary calculation running in the background, the constant low-level accounting of risk that she had been doing so automatically for so long that she had not recognized it as fear. She had recognized it as attention, as carefulness. It had been fear. She loaded the groceries. She drove home. She did not check the rearview mirror more than twice. The second moment was the night Chloe slept through without waking. She had been waking once or twice a night since the compound coming to Nora's room doorway and standing there, not crying, not speaking, just standing, and Nora would say, "I'm here," and Chloe would go back to bed. They had not discussed it directly. They both understood what it was, the body processing something it had not been able to process in the moment, doing the work at night that daylight was too full of other things to accommodate. The night Chloe slept through, Nora woke at 3 a.m. to silence and lay in the dark and listened to the silence and felt something in her chest that she identified after a moment as relief. The specific relief of a child sleeping without fear in a home that was theirs on a month that had a margin. The third moment was the conversation. She had it with Chloe on a Saturday afternoon in November, the two of them driving back from the compound on Highway 50 with the heater on and the windows fogging slightly at the edges. Chloe had been reading in the back seat and had put her book down and said with the directness she had from her mother and had been using more freely since the summer mom, "Yes, are you scared anymore?" Nora thought about it. Honestly, the way she had always tried to answer Chloe's honest questions honestly, because she believed that children deserved the truth calibrated for their understanding rather than reassurance calibrated for adult comfort. Sometimes she said, about different things, not the same things. What different things? School. Whether I am going to be good enough at it. Are you? I think so. I have to keep going to find out. Chloe considered this. She looked out the window at the desert going past. I am not scared anymore, Chloe said. About the man. She paused. I was for a while, but I am not now. I know, Nora said. Carla said it was okay to be scared after Chloe said that it did not mean anything bad was going to happen. It was just the body doing what it needed to do. Carla is right, Nora said. I know, Chloe said with the particular confidence of a child who has identified a trustworthy source and intends to use it. She picked her book back up. The desert ran past outside. The heater ran. The highway ran. The radio played something quiet and old that neither of them turned off. They drove home. Nora called Ryder on a Tuesday evening in March. How is school? He asked. Hard, she said. Good hard. The kind where you go home tired because you learned something, not because you survived something. That is the right kind, he said. How is the compound? Full. He said it with something in his voice that she had not heard in the early days, something that had settled in him like a level finding its true position. Priest is talking about expanding the intake program. Carla already has 14 women on the housing wait list. He paused. Bull got a dog. Bull got a dog. Enormous. He has absolutely no idea what to do with it. She laughed, an actual laugh, the kind that surprised her slightly when it arrived. I am coming out Saturday, she said. I have something for you. A pause. You do not need to drive all the way out here for that. I know I do not need to, she said. I want to. She found him on Saturday, where she had somehow known she would find him outside the garage, in one of the old wooden chairs, watching the desert sky go through its evening colors. The Nevada desert at sunset committed entirely extravagant reds and golds, and the particular deep orange that appeared for exactly 11 minutes before the blue came in from the east and took everything. Carla had put a second chair beside his. She had done it without being asked, because she anticipated things, and because she had made her own assessment of the situation over the past 4 months, and had arrived at conclusions she kept to herself and expressed only in the form of small practical actions like the placement of a chair. Nora sat down. She had an envelope on her knee, and she did not hand it to him right away. They sat in the quiet for a while. The desert was cold and clear, and the kind of still that is only possible 40 miles from the nearest traffic. Torres heard from Mora last week, she said. Harlan's legal team is trying for a plea arrangement. She is declining. She is going to trial. Good. Garrett is confirmed as the primary witness for the prosecution. His testimony is solid, Mora says, the kind that does not shake under cross-examination, because people who have been carrying guilt for a long time know every detail by heart. Ryder nodded. His eyes were on the horizon. I got the final accident reconstruction report, Nora said, about my father. She stopped, took a breath. They confirmed it was not an accident. The vehicle that struck him was a deliberate strike. They have the model from paint transfer evidence. Garrett confirmed the rest. She looked at her hands. So now I know, she said. Does it help? She held the question for a moment. The honest question asked without performance or pity, the question of someone who has had his own version of, now I know, and knows what it does and does not do. I do not know yet, she said. Ask me in a year. He nodded. She picked up the envelope. I talked to the detective who originally handled your family's case. He is cooperating with the federal investigation now. He confirmed that evidence photographs from the original scene were preserved in the archive. She held the envelope out. I requested copies. I thought you should have them. Ryder looked at the envelope. He did not reach for it immediately, a man preparing himself for something making room for it. Then he took it. He opened it slowly and slid out the photograph inside. It was a photograph of 2 people, a woman with dark hair and the kind of laugh that comes through even in a still image, and a small girl of 5 or 6 sitting in the woman's lap with her arms around her mother's neck. Both of them caught mid-movement in something joyful, the specific unguarded joy of people who do not know they are being photographed and are simply entirely present in the moment they are in. Ryder held the photograph with both hands. Nora watched him and did not look away, because looking away would have been the smaller thing, and she had learned over the past 4 months that the smaller thing and the easier thing were often the same thing, and that neither of them was what the moment required. His hands were steady, his face was not entirely. Something moved through it that had been waiting a long time to move. Not the release of something that breaks. The acknowledgement of something that has been held for 7 years without being held properly, without the photograph, without the confirmation, without anyone else in the room who knew the shape of it. Grief acknowledged, rather than grief performed, or grief suppressed. The difference between a man who has been refusing to feel something and a man who has finally given himself permission. She was good, he said. His voice barely made it out. She was the best person I knew. I know, Nora said. My father's notes. The things he wrote about her work, about what she was investigating. He admired her. He was afraid. He did not go public the way she did, and he lived with that for years. And I think part of why he documented everything so carefully, part of why he kept it when it would have been so much easier to destroy it, was because of her. Because she had been willing to go all the way, and he had not, and he could not undo that. But he could keep what she found alive. Ryder was quiet for a long time. The desert finished its sunset the way it always did, all at once, the colors going from extravagant to deep, the dark arriving from the east, while the west still held its last light. She would have liked you, Ryder said. I think I would have liked her too, Nora said. From inside the garage, voices, Priest's low rumble, Bull, who was apparently mid-argument with the dog about something and losing, Hatch telling a story at full volume that was probably the same story he had been telling since 1989, and that everyone listened to like it was new, because with Hatch, the story was never entirely about the events it described. It was about Hatch alive talking here.
and Chloe's voice carrying clearly from somewhere near the kitchen in conversation with Carla about something Nora could not fully make out, but that had the quality of a discussion being conducted by two people who had found each other intellectually well matched and were pleased about it.
Ryder set the photograph carefully on his knee. He looked at it for a moment.
"You gave me something I did not think I would get," he said.
"What?"
He looked at the photograph. At the compound behind them, full of light and the specific kind of noise that belongs to people who have survived difficult things and chosen to keep showing up for each other. "Somewhere to put it down," he said. "The weight." He did not say the word. He did not need to. Nora looked at him, at the photograph, at the garage behind them, at the life that had been built here, not from luck or ease or the absence of difficulty, but from people who had decided over and over in ordinary moments and impossible ones to stay. She thought about her father in a storage unit on 6th Street. She thought about an index card with 2 lines and a key and an apology. She thought about "Trust the man who finds you first," written by a frightened man who had understood something about the shape of what was coming even if he had not known its face. From inside, Chloe called her name, something about the food, something about "hurry up." The voice of a 9-year-old who was also, she knew, checking that she was there, that she could be heard, that the answer would come back. A habit built over years that would probably take years to unbuild, and that was all right. Some habits were earned and should not be shed quickly. She stood. Ryder stayed in his chair with the photograph, and the desert settling into dark around him, and the sounds of the people inside reaching him through the garage walls. The specific music of a place that had become over time and against considerable odds, somewhere that people came when they needed to be somewhere. On his face was something that had not been there 8 months ago when he walked into a roadhouse on Highway 50 for a cup of coffee and sat in the corner and watched a room choose silence. It was not peace exactly. Peace was the absence of trouble. This was something that had been arrived at through trouble, built from the materials that trouble leaves behind the photograph on his knee. The compound at his back. The woman who had just gone inside to answer her daughter. The men who had found their way to this stretch of desert road because someone had painted 5 words on a garage bay door a long time ago and meant them. It was not redemption. Redemption implied a debt, settled a ledger balanced, and his ledger did not balance and would not. His wife and his daughter were not coming back. Earl Briggs was not coming back. The years of riding without direction were not retrievable. What he had instead was this: the photograph, the compound, the Thursday cookouts, the intake program that Carla ran, and the women it reached, the veterans at the long table, Chloe's voice carrying clearly through the garage wall. Nora's footsteps on the concrete inside going toward her daughter. The present still happening, still mattering. He was still here. He sat with the photograph for a long time. He had not had a photograph of them since the fire. The fire had taken everything material, the physical evidence of the life he had lived with his wife, the objects that held the texture of her in them, the photographs that would have been on shelves and walls if shelves and walls had survived. He had rebuilt the compound around an absence that had no image, only the weight of what it had displaced. Now he had an image. He looked at his wife's face. He looked at the specific quality of her laugh, which he had been reconstructing from memory for 7 years with the imprecision of a man working from a description of a painting rather than the painting itself, and found that the reconstruction had been reasonably accurate in its structure, but had missed something in the quality, the particular aliveness of a person who was fully present in a moment and knew it. The photograph had that. Memory approximated it. The photograph contained it. He looked at his daughter, 5, maybe 6 years old, her arms around her mother's neck with the total unself-conscious commitment of a child who has not yet learned that holding on to people is a thing that requires management. He stayed with them for a while in the photograph in the desert evening, in the compound that had been rebuilt from the same stretch of road where everything had been taken. The evening deepened around him. Inside the garage, the sounds of the people continued. Carla's voice, Priest's low rumble, Bull's ongoing negotiation with the dog Chloe, asking a question that Carla was already in the process of answering. The grill smoked, and the desert held its cold, and the stars came out one by one in the specific incremental way they come out when you are sitting still enough to watch. He had not sat still enough to watch the stars in 7 years. He had been moving, always moving, because motion was the only available substitute for purpose when purpose was not available. He was not moving now. Then he put the photograph in the inside pocket of his vest close. He stood up from the old wooden chair. He went inside. Behind him, the Nevada desert held the night the way it always had. Vast and steady and unchanged by any of it, the highway running east and west under the stars, the same highway it had been before any of this started, the same highway it would be long after all of them were gone. But tonight, for now, on this particular stretch of it, there were lights on, and people inside them, and that, it turned out, was everything. In the months that followed, the trial of Harlan Vance became what trials of its kind become when the evidence is thorough and the witnesses are credible, and a live-streamed confession viewed by 800,000 people has already established the basic facts for any jury that might be assembled, long expensive and ultimately inevitable in its conclusion. Maura was prepared. She had always been prepared. What she had been missing was the source documentation that Earl Briggs had locked in a fireproof box in a storage unit on 6th Street in Ely, Nevada, and waited 9 years for someone to find. His daughter had found it. The verdict arrived on a Thursday afternoon in October, 14 months after a Friday night at a roadhouse on Highway 50, when a bartender said, "Keep your money," and a man in a corner booth set down his coffee cup. Harlan Vance, guilty on 12 counts of fraud, 3 counts of bribery, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit arson. Garrett pleaded to a reduced charge and served as the prosecution's primary witness, with the comprehensive testimony of a man who had been keeping records for 9 years and finally had somewhere to put them. The county assessor, the state senator, the federal land management official, each addressed separately, each facing their own proceedings, each in the slow process of accountability that does not move fast but does not stop. There were 14 families along Highway 50 who had been displaced through Vance Land Group's acquisition methods over 12 years. Maura's team documented each case. The findings were part of the federal record. 2 of those families, identified through the acquisition records Earl Briggs had preserved, came forward and provided testimony about the methods that had been used against them. Their testimony was not required for the conviction, but it was part of the record, and the record was permanent, and permanence was something that Harlan Vance had assumed applied only to his own arrangements. The veteran whose land had been taken through a fraudulent code complaint in 2019, a man named Gerald Marsh, who had served 2 tours and come home to a small farm he had bought with his disability payments, received a settlement from the civil judgment that followed the criminal conviction. He used it to return to a property 2 miles from his original land and built a workshop where he repaired small engines and in the evenings taught 2 of his grandchildren to weld. This was not in the news. The news covered the conviction. The news covered the senator's resignation and the assessor's departure and the federal judge's investigation. The news did not cover Gerald Marsh returning to eastern Nevada with a settlement check and a plan. Nora knew about it because Carla told her. Carla knew about it because Carla made it her business to know the outcomes that the news did not cover, the ones that happened in the months after the cameras moved on the ones that constituted the actual and lasting difference in actual and lasting lives. Nora was in her anatomy class when the verdict came through. Torres texted her guilty on all counts. She read the text. She put her phone face down on the desk. She looked at the diagram of the human circulatory system projected on the board at the front of the classroom. She thought about her father. She thought about an index card with 2 lines and a key,
about a fireproof box and a composition notebook and a drive that contained 9 years of a frightened man's courage, preserved in a storage unit that smelled of old cardboard, waiting for his daughter to be ready. She thought about trust the man who finds you first. She thought about February. The anatomy diagram on the board showed the heart in cross-section, the chambers, the valves, the architecture of a system built to keep moving under pressure. Her professor was explaining the concept of resilience in cardiac tissue, the property that allows the heart to sustain its function through conditions that would compromise simpler structures. Nora copied the notes. She would learn this. She would use it. She was going to be very good at this. After class, she drove to the compound. Not because she had planned to, not because she had called ahead. She just drove east on Highway 50 in the October afternoon, with the windows down and the desert smell coming in. The specific smell of sage and cold air and the long open road, and she did not turn on the radio. She was not afraid of quiet anymore. She had not been afraid of quiet since the night she sat in a prefab office in the dark with a phone on her knee and let Harlan Vance explain himself to 800,000 people who had not asked to hear it and heard it anyway, and understood for the first time that silence had not been protecting her. It had been protecting him. She was not going to make that mistake again. The compound was quiet when she arrived. The garage bay door was open. Ryder was inside working on a bike she did not recognize with the focused and unhurried quality he brought to anything that required precision and patience. He looked up when she came in. "Guilty," she said, "all counts." He looked at her for a moment, then he set down the wrench. She watched something complete in his face. Not close exactly. Not arrive. Something like settle. The way a thing settles when the last piece of it is finally in place, and there is nowhere left for it to move. "Your father would be proud," he said. She thought about that. She thought about a man sitting across from Harlan Vance in a room somewhere pressing the record button and saying, "I have everything, Harlan." She thought about the index card. She thought about the storage unit on 6th Street and the combination padlock and Chloe's birthday +1 and the specific backward generosity of a frightened man leaving a door open for his daughter rather than closing it behind him. He would have been terrified, she said. For most of it. "Yeah," Ryder said, "and proud." She looked around the garage, at the sign above the door faded red on the bay wall. "You're safe here." She had driven past that sign every time she came to the compound. She had read it in the headlights that first night in the dark with Chloe in the passenger seat and 3 cardboard boxes in the truck bed and a key in her coat pocket. She had read it and not known yet what to do with it. She knew now. She looked at Ryder. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head slightly, the specific gesture of a man declining credit that does not accurately describe what happened. "Your father kept the records," he said. "You found them. You held the phone." He picked up the wrench again. "I just drove," he said. She looked at him. At the sign. At the open garage door and the desert beyond it, and the highway running east and west under a sky that was already turning the deep afternoon gold of the Nevada October. She thought about everything he had done that was not driving. She thought about a man who had turned a motorcycle around on a highway shoulder and come back for a reason he had not yet been able to name. She thought about him knocking before opening the door of the back room and the specific humanity of that gesture in the middle of a night that had no space for small courtesies. She thought about the wrench going down on the workbench and the steadiness of his hands on the photograph. She did not say any of that. Some things do not require saying because the person who needs to hear them already knows. She said, "I will see you Thursday." He nodded. She went to her truck. She drove back toward Ely on Highway 50, the desert on both sides of her opening up in the way it did at this hour. The light going long and gold across the basin, the mountains blue in the distance, the road ahead clear and straight and entirely hers. She was not afraid of the road anymore either. She had not been afraid of it since the night she had driven it in the dark with a phone live streaming in her hands, and understood that the road belonged to everyone on it, including her. The radio was playing something she half recognized, a song from a long time ago, and she left it on. She thought about the things that had been given back to her that she had not known were gone. Not the obvious ones, the job, The margin, the medication covered Chloe sleeping through the night. Those had been given back in the obvious way through the visible machinery of consequence and settlement and the slow restitution of a system correcting what it had failed to prevent. She thought about the less obvious ones. The ability to walk to her truck in a parking lot without calculating the sight lines. The ability to sit in her anatomy class with her phone face down and not reach for it every 3 minutes. The ability to drive on this highway in the evening with the windows down and not feel the low-grade vigilance that had been her companion for so long she had stopped calling it fear and started calling it attention. These were the things she had not known had been taken. The baseline condition of a person who is not being threatened. The specific quality of a life lived in the present tense rather than the near future of the next potential crisis. She had been robbed of it incrementally by the note on the windshield and the job she lost and the inspection notices and the years before all of that, the years of her father's locked closet and the accident that was not an accident, and the unanswered question of what had happened to him and whether anything could be done about it. She had been robbed of the ordinary, which is the thing that makes the extraordinary bearable. She had it back now, not perfectly, not completely, not forever. Life did not offer those terms. But tonight on this highway with the radio playing and the mountains blue in the distance and Chloe's reading club book on the passenger seat where she had left it this morning, she had it back. She drove. Behind her, 42 miles back and getting smaller in the rearview mirror, the compound sat on its stretch of desert road with its lights on and its sign above the door. Ahead of her, school and Chloe and February and the anatomy of the human heart and the long, ordinary, irreplaceable work of a life being lived. She did not look back. The road ahead was long and it was hers. She drove.